He is the product manager at HEMRO Group, which manufactures Ditting, Mahlkönig and Anfim grinders. And today he's going to be talking about heat in grinders and where it comes and what it actually does. So please give a very warm welcome to Mr. Christian Klatt.
Sorry, no Apple. I think I'm the only one, right? Oh, no, the only one on stage. No, hello everyone. First of all, I want to thank the Baristas Guild for this event and for getting these amazing speakers on stage, like Chris and Maxwell and of course Scott and all the others, talking about different things and talking about technology, talking about science, and putting more and more pressure on us as a grinder manufacturer. And then, so I'm very humble that I can stand here as well in front of you after all these great speakers. And I'll try to give you more insight into just one little part of what we are researching, what we're trying to find out, what we're trying to improve. And of course, there's lots of other fields that you probably want to ask questions, so maybe we have some time to do that. I'd kind of like presentations of about 2 minutes and then Q&A for 45 minutes because that's more interesting for you probably, but it's going to take me like 20, 30 minutes. We have a few questions and answers, hopefully, and then we're going to do a cupping as well, prepared as we speak, so it's going to be pretty interesting. So what I want to talk about is what kind of influence does temperature and heat have in 3 different things. So first of all, the machine itself, what happens with the metal, with the motor, with the grinder itself. What does this heat, which is created in certain ways, what does it do to the coffee? Coffee beans and the coffee powder coming out, and what it does to the actual beverage then in the end, what you give to the customer. So the customer is more interested in the last point. We try to give you the best around the first point, and you baristas or everyone working with the coffee is interested in the coffee. So where does it come from, the heat? I try to speak as scientifically correct as possible, but I might also just talk along. So if Chris is still here, Christopher? No, or anyone, correct me anytime, ask questions please anytime if you don't understand something. So where is the heat created in a built-in grinder? So this is for example, that's the built-in grinder of the K30. Where does the heat come from? Of course, we put electrical energy into the motor here in the bottom, and that electric energy is transformed into the rotation and, unfortunately, heat. So motors are very good heating systems, unfortunately. So the heat starts building up in the bottom of the motor and goes up, and then is transformed into or goes into the grind chamber as well, because that's connected directly, screwed onto the motor, so the heat goes through that. And eventually also in the grinding discs, because they're also connected. Then breaking the beans heats up the grind chamber, so even without the motor, if we put the motor next door, use belts into this room and just have the grind chamber here, the grind chamber by grinding will also heat up. So it's not only the motor, it's the friction between the ground coffee particles, is the friction of the coffee with the grind chamber and of course with the grinding discs. So even belt drive grinders will get hot. The grind chambers of belt driven grinders will get hot. So the grinder transforms, or the grinder gives away some of the heat into the coffee, of course. There's, and that's actually a good thing for us as a manufacturer. If we just look at the machine, grinding coffee cools the grinder because heat goes into the coffee and out of the system. It's great for the machine. If you use a grinder empty, it heats up much faster than if you're grinding coffee. But I'll talk about that a little more in depth later. It's very important to know that the longer the beans stay unground, the complete beans stay in the grind chamber, the longer they stay there, the more heat they can take up out of the grind chamber. So if you grind very regularly, the coffee will slowly get hot and the whole system will get hot. If you then stop for 2 minutes and then grind the first shot, it will be really hot because it had lots of time to get the to go up in temperature. So it's good for the grinder because we lose, or the temperature goes down of the chamber, but it's bad for the coffee, of course. One thing, there's a myth, or there's the saying going around that slower grinding, so less rotations, is better, or it gives a more preferable cup. Why is it better? Because it's more gentle, but what does gentle mean to the coffee? We don't know if gentle is good or not. Maybe we want to hit the coffee real hard. But the slower the motor, the longer a shot takes to grind. Okay, so the longer the motor runs, the hotter it gets, the more friction we have, and so on. So a real fast motor would do a double shot in 1 minute, 1 second. So very little time to heat up. Actually, for us, would be better if we could run as fast as possible. But then we go into problems of dosing accuracy and so on. So, but we stick to one parameter now. And of course, also the more after the burst in the grind chamber, the more ground coffee there still is after the shot. So every grind-on-demand grinder, which is grinding by time, has ground coffee after the burst in the spout before it falls out. All this ground coffee will also heat up quite a lot, more than the beans, because there's less air to insulate. So I just want to show you a few results from the temperature tests we did when we developed from the single K30 to the ventilated K30 to the peak, which will come out soon. So we did lots and lots of temperature tests in the lab. Long duration tests, days over days over days, with different shot cycles. So I don't want to put numbers there, 50, 60, 100, 150 degrees. I don't want to put the exact time, so just to give you the correlation. So if we look at a coffee grinder empty, okay, no coffee. And we do, let's say, 2 double shots per minute. So 4 seconds on, 26 seconds off to cool. And then 4 again, and then 26, so that's why it makes 1 minute. And we look at the motor. We start, let's say, at room temperature, so that's around 20. Of course, the temperature rises pretty quickly in the beginning, and then after 1, 2, 3 hours, we have a stable temperature in the motor. The grind chamber will follow that, because without coffee grinding, the grind chamber is only heated by the motor. So it will follow, be always slightly behind in temperature, but when the motor comes to a standstill in temperature, the grind chamber will eventually, after 4, 6, 7 hours, have the same temperature, and the whole system will all have the same temperature. Now if we start grinding coffee actually, motor gets hotter because we need more torque, so there's a higher current going through the motor, so we have a hotter motor. But the grind chamber actually cools down because the coffee is there and it takes heat out of the system. So grinding is good. All right, let's take these first ones away. So that's grinding coffee. Now we add ventilation. Fan in the bottom, fan in the back, as much as airflow as possible to get the heat. First of all, now I've been talking about cooling by grinding, now we start cooling by airflow. So the motor cools down and has a lower constant temperature in the end. And of course the grind chamber also cools down even more after the grinding. So let's take those away. So that's with ventilation and grinding. And now with slower motor, slower RPM of the motor. So the motor is not running 4 seconds per cycle, but let's say 6. So it heats up more again because it's running longer, because there's more electrical energy needed, there's more heat created, and therefore also the grind chamber follows that. Okay, so that's just a few directions we found to quite interesting. It's not that, so we have to work with that. We have to see how we can work with the airflow and improve the airflow and increase the surface of the motor so air can actually take away more heat. For you as a user of this grinder, of any grinder, really, I don't want to talk about our grinders only. It's any grinder, of course. You just have to keep that in mind and know where the heat comes from, know where it goes, know where we can cool better, or what happens, why is the coffee heating up, so you know what to do with it. So that just sums up the results a little bit. So if you look at the standard K30 not ventilated, you can do two double shots a minute for hours and hours and hours without overheating it. If you do more for a short time, it's also no problem. If you do more over a long time, if your peak hours in your cafe take a little longer, then you might overheat the grinder. It's just not made to do that much coffee. The K30 Air was, with that K30 Air, just one fan in the back. We can do 4 double shots per minute, and the peak 2 fans can do 6 double shots per minute without overheating. So if you would take other grinders as well, take it without fan, take it with 1 fan, with 2 fans, you would get these steps as well. And cooling the grind chamber gives a slightly more consistent grind adjustment. We have therefore a more consistent coffee temperature and a different or more consistent extraction. Extraction meaning taste in the cup quality. Because so coming to I've talked about the coffee a lot already, but also what we've heard from presentations from Noah Simonelli and from Colin Harmon talking about the mythos, how they developed that, and that they found out actually that there's this myth in the market that heating grinders, or if the grinder heats up, the gap, of course, then the material expands and the gap between the discs goes bigger. Because if the grinder heats up, we realize shots going faster. That means that the grounds have to be coarser, so we're just finer to get these shots longer again. But if we actually look at the, so this is not happening, okay? Because what actually does happen is that the aggregate states of the coffee beans change. And it's not the particle size distribution, it's actually just the behavior of the coffee. The extractability, the solubility of the coffee changes. Okay, and it's just behaving like it's coarser. So if we look at the particle size distributions, and also Colin talked about that in some talks, and maybe others as well, I've only seen Colin talks, that the particle size distributions are actually the same. So they are not explaining why the shots run faster. It really goes down into physics and chemics in the coffee. And this is where I end. This is where I can't go on, so we have to find help and talk with others and do projects with others. So that's a test we did to isolate the influence of temperature of the coffee. All right, so, and we're going to do something like that in the cupping later. We, as Christopher was saying, if you want to do tests, you have to look at certain parameters and try to isolate these parameters. Don't try to find a solution of everything in one test. Isolate one parameter and try to change that with keeping everything else the same. Sounds very reasonable. It's very difficult with coffee. So lots of different parameters have influence, and if you change one, you definitely change others as well. And that might have a positive or negative influence. So what we did is we took an EK43, because that is kind of on the table always empty. And if you grind one shot, so we did that with espresso, so it was only 20 gram shots. No real temperature increase in the grinder. If you give it a rest afterwards, we can say that the grinder was at constant temperature. What we did, we heated and cooled the coffee beans. So we took away the parameter of the grinder. The grinder really stays the same. The gap between the discs, there's no expansion of wall material or whatever. we dialed in the grinder at room temperature with room temperature coffee to give us our desired recipe and extraction. That was at 20 degrees. And then we had coffee from the freezer, and then we created water baths and put coffee beans in bags and put it in the water and let it rest there with the temper so it sinks. A few bags broke, so we had to do it again. And grinding wet coffee doesn't work. So we managed to get these temperatures 40, 60, and 80 degrees Celsius. So we did. Then we took these coffees and didn't change the grind at all, just threw them all in the grinder and did the extraction and tasted and looked at the particle size distribution and did all the measurements with refractometer. So this is what the curves look like with a volume percentage, right? You saw these curves first with Christopher, and also Scott showed some of them. Yes, there are differences, very small. We realized also working together with Christopher that just a different ticking box in the computer program we have with the laser analysis gives us this curve, because that's surface area percentage, and that actually highlights the fines way more. But again, I don't want to go into the results too much, because this is only one test, to be honest. And as Christopher also said, we have to get rid of all the errors. So we have to do it again and again and again, maybe 50 times. And to also get rid of the error of the machine itself, of the laser, because we had some really weird results. So we redid it, and there's still some weird results. So the pink one of the 80 degrees coffee looks a little different, which doesn't make sense. So I guess it's we guess it's the laser. And to be honest, there was a slight direction. There was a definite direction and tendency in taste. And that was the cooler, the higher the extraction, and the sweeter the shot. And that definitely goes into the direction that everybody, I think, feels like. Or not the cooler the better, but the hotter the worse. I guess that's more what we realize. Like, if it gets more than 40, 60, or even 80 degrees, we get worse shots in worse cups. So, coming to the last point, we have the hot or cold coffee ground in our portafilter, let's say espresso, in our portafilter, in the machine. What does it actually do to the beverage? What can we do? I already talked about that. What happens if the coffee, if the grinder and therefore also the coffee heats up? We have faster shots, bitter, weaker shots, more diluted, or they are less good, and they have less strength and bitter, yes, over-extracted. So what we do, we adjust finer to lengthen the shots again, but that also increases extraction, right? Grinding finer increases extraction. So there's a little problem here. So I guess I have to be honest, I didn't do too many tests about that, but I guess lots of you have experience on actually playing then with brewing temperatures. That lowering the brewing temperature again, yes, so if you grind finer to increase shot time, you have to decrease extraction by lowering the temperature. So that helps a little for your cup quality. But to be discussed what else you can do. So I don't want to say it's none of our business because we just do the grinder, but it's very important for us, for example, that we work together with all of you, with a group of dedicated people who have more knowledge about brewing and more knowledge about everyday brewing and brewing science. So espresso machine manufacturers, filter coffee machine manufacturers, and so on, to get more into that, what to do. So we can try to prevent heating, but if we cannot, we have to work together with the industry to counter-steer and to come up with solutions with on how we can actually work with that issue that we cannot prevent. That brings me to the end, 25 minutes. Oh, that's good. We have. Well, thank you very much first. And as I said, I always like Q&A much more on that topic. Maybe there's other topics, depending on how much time we have. But and I'm also here till tomorrow afternoon, so we can talk a lot about grinding. I know that also from the talks of Chris and Scott, I think grinding gets more and more important, and more pressure is on all grinder manufacturers to do something and come up with solutions in the grinders or solutions together with machines and water and so on to counter steer the issues. So interesting times for us and everyone. So if there's questions, Kalle?
I have one. I have one right away.
I knew.
I have one right away. So with the different temperatures, were the extraction yields much different?
Yeah, that was the that was the one clear direction. If the curves don't really show, the only part of the curve. Well, do you see the yes? The only part of the curve is this part from the bottom here, where the pink goes behind the other ones, up to kind of here. That order was the order of extraction yields and also of preferred like taste preferences. So really, the coolest blue on the left gave the highest extraction, sweetest cup, and the pink on the very right, which is the hottest, gave the it went over on extraction actually.
Okay.
But the small part, like we know what we're looking for, so we start digging in here. Okay, this is it. But it's definitely not the answer. So it's very difficult to interpret these curves.
More questions?
When you did the tests, did you measure the humidity of the coffee beans and how
No.
it affects the temperature? Because they're more colder, it's more humid. And how does the distance between the blades affect the heating in the grinder? Because it should.
Well, that was 3 questions, right? No, we didn't measure the humidity or the moisture content. No, we didn't. So it was a pretty simple test. We did it once. I think we did it twice. But yeah, so it's just the beginning. Second question. The problem, with moisture content. I just read the interview with Cahan Yeretsian, the professor from Zurich, who just is in Australia, I think, with Toby State, and on Sprachwasser was that interview on freshness, and I think he also talked to Collab, and freshness, and also on freezing coffee. Should people freeze freshness? Should you freeze coffee to keep it fresh longer? And our results show that frozen coffee seems to extract better, or seems to extract higher, not better. So I never want to say better, just higher. Everybody has to then think themselves what's better or not. But so he said, freezing coffee, yes. So freezing anything makes it last longer, fresh longer. The problem is heating it up again, because then you have moisture and then you have all that air, water condensation and so on. So for one thing, it's good that you freeze, but then you have the problem of warming it up. So I had this idea, and I was talking to some people. And in the future, every coffee shop needs a cooling chamber, like butcheries, with a grinder, with a barista with a hat and gloves, dosing coffee, throwing it into the grinder, grinding it, and handing it out through a window where the other barista would quickly brew it. That would get rid of the moisture problem. Sorry, the third question? Difference between the gap, how does that influence temperature? Of course, the finer you grind, the more heat you will have. So Turkish fine grinding, very difficult because the grinder heats up very much. French press grinding, you can do that for hours and not have too much heat. Material of the blades, what's the influence? More tests to be done.
It was one question per person.
Yes. So there's no experience yet. Yes.
So I'd imagine you are in the middle of any conversations for grinders of the future. So a problem that's sort of across the board for all grinders that I've used is like retention, bar maybe one of two. Is there anything like cool you can tell us that's going to maybe combat that problem of coffee retention within grinders?
Sorry, please say again.
Where are grinders going? How are they improving in regards to like coffee retention within like espresso grinders?
Retention, you mean ground coffee left in the grind chamber? Well, yes. Good question. Just think the answer. Well, of course, there's the two different systems. Either you have something like the EK where the grinder is always empty and you pre-dose either by weight or volume with a slider on top or with a scale, and then the grinder's empty, and then there's no retention. But talking about grind-on-demand grinders that are nowadays timed, there will always be ground coffee in the chamber because you cannot let the grinder run longer, like have an after run, or maybe if there's a second motor you can run brushes after grinding, or you have a kind of airflow right after to blow everything out. Ideas, costs. So there's lots of ideas. And of course, I guess there's a lot of geeks who would pay 5,000-6,000 euros for, well, prototypes, but or also these ideas, nitrogen cooling, Peltier elements, whatever. But of course, it always needs to be possible in serial production and make sense on everyday coffee bar without a air pressure system in place. And of course, you can do, the Mythos has the angled grinder, so coffee might fall out easier. There's smaller grind chambers, so you have less coffee with better wings, throwing out coffee better, bigger spouts. There's lots of things, sure. But I think, we need to get rid of that retention, and the only way is dose before you grind.
Oh, so my question is, do you have any experience, or if the grinder not cleaning at all during they are using, it's heating up more quickly, or it's much worse? And then if you have this experience, can you do like this? For example, the car company, they make like even I know the grinder is right, you need cleaning, but you have to be, I think, more tough, like every 10,000 kilometers you need to change the oil or something, like more seriously, because even where I come from, even in Hungary and Spain, they don't want to use any stuff from Grandi's or Puli or whatever.
No. That's true, yes. Well, yes, please clean your grinders. Okay, if the grinder is always empty, like the EK or any other shop grinder that you pre-dose and then grind, of course there's less retention, but really these fine coffee grounds, these powders on the left, like 10 microns, 5 microns, this is flour fine powder, even flowing in the air, with the oils, get rancid very quickly. And that's kind of stuck in your grinder. Well, and it will block the spout hole where the coffee goes out of the chamber. So if that's smaller, you have more friction, your grinder will slow down. I have lots of more curves that how cleaning or not cleaning affects that is more about dosing consistency. Dosing consistency in these grind-on-demand grinders, timed, working by time, 4.2 seconds, only can work consistent if the grinder is clean, if it's in factory condition, so open spout, everything is clean. That will stay like that for 2 days. And after 2 days, you will have coffee residues and blockages. So clean your grinder, and you can only last your grinder only will last if you do it regularly. Don't do it once a month with grinds or pulley or whatever. Then these cleaners will not work. You will have to open and scratch everything out. Maybe even the brush doesn't work because it's all so hard. I've seen really, really bad grinders. So dosing consistency, if you're looking at dosing consistency, you need to clean your grinder.
So talking about on daily level and then kind of weekly, how should you clean a grinder? Best practices.
clean it weekly with grinds or pulley grind. We from our group, we do not usually say open your grinder every day or open it every 3 days or whatever, because that can actually make things worse than you're trying. If you're not really knowing what you're doing, if you didn't have a service training. I know that people are doing it, some with, of course, mothers are much easier to open than ours, for example, because it's just the lid done and we have a proper housing lid and then you're in. So, so we actually don't say open it every day, we say clean your grinder every week with a grinder cleaner. So you actually don't open it and you don't break anything. Of course, clean your hopper every day, please.
Hello. Can we go back to the slide where you talked about the speed of the motor? Okay. You said that if we go slower, then we need a longer dosing time, so we have more temperature. But if we go slower and we have increased surface of grinding, then we can go slower and keep the same dosing time. So we won't have more heat, isn't it?
So it means slower motor does not increase grinding time for the same dose. It does.
No, if I have a bigger surface of grinding, so if I have different kind of burrs.
Of course. But here I'm looking at the same grinder, 65 millimeters. I didn't change the grinder, I just run it slower. Of course, if we increase the diameter of the burrs, then we have faster grinding again, right? So you have to change more parameters in order to get the same speed out of the grinder. And then you might have less temperature, yes. But yeah, trying to keep, well, in this test we kept as many parameters constant as possible and just changed one, just to have a look. Of course, now the temperature is going up by grinding, by running the motor slower. If we would now increase the diameter of the burr, we would grind faster and therefore go down in temperature again, yes.
You've talked about motor speed and design and cooling and things like that, but you haven't talked about blade profile and how the cutting. Did you wish I hadn't asked that? Okay, sorry.
So but now we're getting to the point where the questions are getting harder and harder and harder.
Okay. But we're looking for a clean cut, we're looking for an accurate cut, we're looking for repeatable cuts from all the blades as they go round. And how close are you to that?
That perfect cut.
The perfect cut. The better cut.
The better cut, yes. Very good question. I'm completely honest, I cannot answer that. Not don't I know, or am I not allowed? Why is DK so preferred? Yes, I also cannot answer that. It's somewhere in between. Some things we don't know, some things we know. Of course, some things we are happy to tell. Some things we have to keep in the company. So it's yes. So if you compare K30 and EK, because that's the grinders I know more. I can't talk about Mythos or Rober or whatever because I don't have the data. But so the difference between K30 and EK43 is. Stephen.
Should we ask Stephen? It's like, do you want to be a millionaire? Call your friend.
Let's see.
Hey, Stephen, Christian here has 30 seconds to tell which grinder profile is the best.
Okay. So in the EK, the burrs are bigger diameter. They have a different material, cast steel against tool steel in the K30. So the tooth design is completely different, and it's impossible to compare. Again, changing one parameter at a time would mean cutting this exact same profile that we have in the K30 in the smaller burrs into a 98 millimeter EK43 burr, made from tool steel, exact same design. exact same design might also means that we have to make the teeth bigger, buy different tools and so on. So it's a major step. And then see what that does. So that might narrow down the influence of the diameter. And then we'd have to change to a different material. So the surface of the cast steel burr is different. What does that do to coffee? Well, we're slowly getting there. So it's, again, only in the burr. There's so many parameters that make a big change. And lots we know, some we don't. So it's, we can, when we design a new burr, like we're now trying to design a new burr for the new espresso grinder, we did. And so up to a certain point, we can predict what's going to happen, and we're looking for something, so even as smallest particle size distribution possible. We know what we learned from the EK, we try to put that in a new burr. But let's say 60% we can predict, and the rest is hope. To be completely honest.
We can wrap up with hope.
I'm too honest.
So
my R&D department will kill me. Where's the camera? Hi, guys.